Welcome to the Rising with Christian podcast, a place where women put down perfection and pick up tools for self-empowerment and personal clarity. I'm your host, Christian B. Aaron, and let's rise together. Hello, risers, and welcome to another episode of the Rising with Christian podcast. I am so blessed that you have stopped what you're doing to become a riser and a part of this very intimate community. I hope that you've been rising this week and that the enemy has not been getting to you, because we know he's busy, but you're gonna rise anyway because that's what we do. So this mental health month, I have a very, very special guest by the name of Dr. Alicia. She is a psychologist from Connecticut that now lives in Washington, D.C. She has over 10 years of clinical experience, and y'all, she has not one, but she has 4 degrees. So she is beauty and brains, all right? Her work is centered around cognitive behavioral theory, which asserts that what we think directly impacts our feelings and behaviors. Dr. Alicia has helped hundreds to improve their lives by tackling rigid thinking or navigate daily worries. She is a speaker, an anxiety bootcamp host, workshop curator, and contributor to many articles and blogs. She has also been seen on BuzzFeed, Good Morning Washington, Therapy for Black Girls podcast, Bustle, and so much more. And now, risers, we have her as a guest here today talking about mental health and slaying your anxiety. Can y'all help me welcome Dr. Alicia today? Dr. Alicia, let's get right into it. Is that okay?
Yeah, let's.
All right. So before we get into mental health and really talking about how you have helped so many people across the world, did you always know that you were going to be a psychologist?
Not exactly. I think I always knew that I wanted to do something with people or in the helping profession. So originally I wanted to be an OBGYN. And then as I started reading on my own, at a very young age, I was like, ooh, blood and medical school, never mind. So I essentially spent the same amount of time just doing psychology instead.
Right. So you, so when was it your master's that you decided that you wanted to further it to be a psychologist, or what?
I think I knew in undergrad, I knew that I wanted to pursue psychology. And I actually had considered mixing psychology and law together. I wasn't sure. So I went through my master's and I started doing therapy. And then I was like, I think I really want to be a doctor though. Back to school again. The second master's on the way to the doctorate. And I started, actually doing some sort of forensic psychology work. Actually that moved into a couple of different areas. And where I am now, I landed in private practice on my own.
Wonderful. We're going to get into her private practice a bit later, y'all. So you knew since undergrad that you wanted to go into this field. Now, I know within the past, I would say 5 years, the stigma of mental health is going down. But at that time when you were saying yes to this calling, was it something that society talked about? Was it a taboo topic, or was it really being paved in society?
That's a good point. Not quite. I think that there have been, as I've grown up, silent rumblings about wellness, what that means, but in a very broad, a very, very broad sense. And so I think for me, what pointed me towards psychology originally was getting to college and seeing that everyone was reacting this differently to the same things. And I just got curious about people well, why would you see it that way? Why would you see it that way? And I really wanted to help people, I think, work on their perspectives, knowing that there are certain perspectives that actually provide you with success versus ones that don't. And so I'm happy to see people talking more about the supports that they have in place to do that, instead of making it very taboo or thinking that therapy is only for someone who's maybe just severely mentally ill or just really in crisis. It really can be used across the board, I think.
Wow. Yeah. And I think that in my life personally, therapy has truly
been transformational, but I don't want to assume that everyone listening, they're familiar with therapy. So if you just had to break this thing down, what would you describe therapy as?
I think that's a great question. The way that I would describe it is that therapy is your own personal space to be heard and not judged, to sort of maybe lay things out and process them for yourselves, and really a space in which you can kind of let go and be who you are. It takes time, of course. You have to build trust with someone, but ultimately, that is something so valuable that there's very few places and spaces you can get that.
Yeah. And I think it's so key that you said it's not just for people who have mental illness. And I know personally, because I have people in my family that have been diagnosed. So when should we go to a therapist? If we're not just going because we have something that is significantly or something that is diagnosed in what's the book DSM that you all by?
Yeah, the Diagnostic Statistical Manual.
Okay, so when do we go to a therapist?
So this, of course, because I'm a psychologist, I am biased, and my first answer is you can go whenever. Mm-hmm. So there are some people who come to therapy preemptively. Like there are people who contact me and say, hey, I have a new job coming up. I'm moving.
Yeah.
I'm having a baby, like some sort of life transition that's important to them. And they want to have that space available to them to how it may feel, or have it available if there is a crisis. But also I think another concept is when you're not feeling like yourself. So there's a lot of times where people, maybe they can't put it into words. They're like, I'm just not feeling like myself. Things are off. To be honest, therapy, you can come to a therapy session and just get that professional feedback to say like, oh, it sounds like you're doing okay. Or it sounds like you might just need to check in. The same way if you went to the doctor, you're like, my elbow kind of hurts. Like, I'm not sure what it is. Right. It's not falling off, but let me just go get it looked at.
Yeah. Yeah. And I truly believe in the power of, you mentioned earlier, thoughts. So thoughts they just have such a broad range, and you don't have to have a particular pattern of thoughts to go to a therapist, nor do you have to have an emergency. Sometimes you can just go to talk and just process things. Talk about the importance of thoughts. I know that's an area that you are so passionate about. We have thoughts. We don't always talk about it, but where did your passion for thoughts come from?
Yeah, that's the interesting. I can't never put my finger on where it came from, but I think it was when we are in school, we learn about a lot of different types of theories and ways to conceptualize issues. And CBT, which stands for Cognitive Behavioral Therapy, which is a fancy way of saying thoughts and feelings affect your behavior. Essentially, I noticed that the way that we think about something really leads to certain interpretations. It can bring up certain emotions, and it definitely influences our behavior. So an example of that is if somebody bumps into me and I think, oh, this person's in a rush, they're just trying to get to work, I will more than likely brush it off, right? I'm like, oh, it's okay. But if they bump into me and I think, oh, you did it on purpose, it's going to inspire a much different thought, and even maybe I'll push them back, something else. So I became very interested in how our perspective just can impact everything that we do. As we're growing up, we all have thoughts, right? We all have internal dialogue, but you're not really raised to ask questions.
Yeah.
Or really, it's not typical to be raised to say like, oh, sometimes your thoughts are inaccurate. Sometimes thoughts are biased. So I think what I love about therapy is that I can help someone walk through, what is your thought style? Is it beneficial to you? And if not, let's figure out in some ways how it got there, but also how we can modify it.
Yeah. I love this topic because thoughts control our actions. And so if someone is saying, okay, this sounds great, and I have this pattern of thoughts that I want to change, and I know that this isn't a therapy session, but how does one begin to reprogram the thoughts I have, the undesired thoughts?
Yeah, so I think if I had to really boil it down, it's probably a 2 to 3 step process. So the first step would be awareness, to just be aware of, this is how I think. This is how I tend to think, or I'm prone to think this way. So you can kind of slow down and say, oh, wait a minute. am I doing that thing that I usually do? The second is to then consider alternatives. So it's kind of accepting this idea that the way that I think may not be accurate or just may not be helpful. So what's another way to look at this? And the third is practice. You have to practice that over and over. You don't just think something new one time and then you stop doing it. You have to really practice and kind of train yourself, like with exercise. Like, I'm going to consider alternatives. I'm going to give myself the opportunity to have a choice here, and I'm going to do something different.
Wow. So choice definitely matters. And for those who are waking up, I know for me, one of the things that helped me is just my morning regimens. It truly affects thoughts. But if you had to think about maybe the main trigger for like most people, and I know everyone's different, see a pattern in your clients or a pattern in society, what are some things, maybe our environment, maybe it's our circle, what are some things that you know directly affect our thoughts?
That is a complicated question because we are different, and I might put it under this category of rules, meaning we have rules that we operate by.
Yeah.
Sometimes those rules, though, are too restrictive. So if I'm living by a lot of like vague things, like I should be further in life, what does that mean? And so I start to make meaning of very much everyday situations based off these rules that are in the background. So I would say people to pay attention to themselves and ask yourself, like, what type of rules am I operating by? What am I telling myself I should be doing, or how should I act? And then really take a step back and say, is that true though?
Yeah.
Should I be doing that? Do I have to be that way?
Yeah.
That isn't working for my current context.
And I think the rules that you're talking about, and just from the conversations I have, society and social media has been creating rules for people instead of people being empowered to understand their own rules and own boundaries. Like, what is your take? And I know that you're being on social media, your platform is simply amazing. But how has social media affected the mental health, not just in people, but just in the world? Like what do you see from your professional eye?
From my professional eye, I think social media, of course, like you said, I think it's a great platform and tool. I use it to share information. I like humor. I love the memes, the jokes.
Yeah.
I think what can happen, though, is that we can get this really false sense of either connection, or, for example, I'm only going to post the picture that I liked the best. And so we start, the phrase is like, oh, that's just someone's highlight reel. But we kind of interpret it as this is a representation of them. And how come when we do that comparison thing that humans just do, how come I'm not matching up? It's important to realize that really good Instagram feeds are curated. They took 70 pictures to get one.
Yeah.
They recorded it, to myself included. They recorded it 6 times for the best one. And so the idea is that we have to remember this is just a snapshot. It's not necessarily a full representation, just the same way that we present ourselves in a certain light is temporary. Everyone has, fluctuating days, moods. And I do appreciate more often I see people trying to be more transparent and talk about like, I don't always have it together. Just because I have nice outfits doesn't mean anything. It's important to try not to fall into the comparison game and look at it for what it is, which is content, entertainment, information, not necessarily a projection of how you need to be.
Yeah. That comparison is hard. And when I feel like it's seeping into me, and it doesn't happen often, but from time to time, I'm like, oh, I wish I could do this, or I should have done that. And I'm just like internally beating myself up. I've experienced that, but I talk to a lot of people that deal with imposter syndrome, and, social media is a root in a lot of the conversations. Like, how do you encourage people to break free from the shackles of imposter syndrome?
Yeah, so imposter syndrome, a lot of it stems around this idea of like, they're going to find out that I'm not actually qualified, or I don't belong here, I can't do this. In some ways, unless we're, oftentimes it can be hard to dispute it if we're stepping out into something new. So I don't have a reference point to say, oh, I've done this before. But if it's something you've been working hard towards and you have somewhat of a track record, I say like, check your own resume, like remind yourself of why you were chosen or selected, especially when it comes to things like work and other opportunities. If you were chosen, that was outside of you. They're not, sometimes I talk about say these things out loud. So to hear if they actually make sense.
Yeah.
Like, did the company secretly come together to choose you just to embarrass you? Like, that just doesn't even make sense. Because they read your resume and they thought you were a good candidate. And so it's important to sort of practice that. Again, I talk about it like a muscle. Practice the muscle of like, what if I actually belong? What are the alternatives? I could be a good fit for this opportunity. I could be just the right person to be on this podcast. I could be, just the right person to start my new blog or whatever it is that you're trying to do.
Yeah.
Oftentimes we spend a lot of time on what if this is not the right thing, or what if this goes bad, and not a lot of time on what if this goes well. What would that feel like? Imagine our thoughts impact our feelings. So if I'm thinking a lot of negative things, it would make sense that I feel negative. But if I am trying to make that shift to think more positive or even neutral things, my resulting emotions can only be different.
Yeah, I do believe in practicing that muscle, and it takes time. Is there anything tangible that you could recommend a person that says, all right, I want to begin to practice that muscle? Maybe it's an activity or an exercise that they can probably put to use.
Yeah, so oftentimes I think people consider that I'm saying just think the opposite. And that is a little close to toxic positivity, right? When they talk about it, someone's like, no, don't think anything negative. It's just going to be fine. That's not quite realistic. And oftentimes your brain will reject it. Like, that's silly. Like, I don't believe it. So I tell people to just ask yourself the question, what else? So if I'm on my way somewhere and I'm thinking like, this is just going to go bad. And I say, okay, well, what else? It could go great. It could go okay. It could be half good. It could be half bad. It could be a lot of fun and I get tired at the end. There's so many other ways that this could play out. The goal is to just kind of reduce this idea that my first thought is the right one and the only one. Your first thought might be wrong, and it's definitely not the only one.
I like that. I caught myself doing that today. I actually have this engagement later, and I'll say, oh man, I really don't feel like going. But then I say, you know what? It's going to be good. I may have a wonderful time. And so I caught myself because I've been aware of my thoughts. But I even had a conversation with a family member the other day. And they made this statement of, I didn't know I was depressed. Like how can someone stay in tune with themselves to know exactly how they're feeling and then to be able to articulate that feeling?
Yeah. That can be challenging. I can acknowledge that because we're with ourselves day in, day out. It's almost like, this is more so for the ladies, but if you ever cut your bangs and you're like, it's never going to grow back. And then somebody sees you and they're like, your hair's grown so much. When you're with yourself every day, it's a little harder to notice small changes. But I will say, if you find yourself shying away from things that you previously enjoyed, if you find some significant changes in your eating and your sleeping habits, like a significant bout of insomnia or eating more or less, and again, I know that is a little less tangible, but that like, I'm just not feeling like myself. What is that? There are quizzes online, like free. They're just pre-screeners. So don't, take it with a grain of salt, but there are pre-screeners online. You can just probably Google like depression screener and it will ask you some questions. And at the very least, if it says something sounds off here, you could at least take it to your doctor. Wow. Your primary care physician, they're also equipped. Medical doctors are trained to have a baseline knowledge of these things, and they might be able to say, yeah, that does sound off. Like, let me give you a referral. So it can be helpful to just notice your habits. And depression often is highlighted by some isolation. So if you are, maybe typically more social, you start noticing like, I just want to pull away. Yeah. And that is actually the time that you probably want to consider, or at least be mindful about, like, let me actually get some connections, establish some support.
And I think it's even empowering for those who are listening. If you see someone, if you know someone and you sense a change, like I remember riding the metro, if you see something, say something.
Yep.
I mean, you have to be mindful of how you say it and when you say it. But if you also notice changes in a friend or a loved one, to just reach out. And what's the best way to do that? Because that is sometimes a sensitive topic.
It can be. I think there's two stances. There's one, like you said, of curiosity versus telling them you're different. I know something's wrong with you versus like, hey, I've noticed just the past weeks or months, I think something has been different. Like, have you noticed that? Right? Like kind of allowing them to talk about it, to see where they are with it. And then also remembering, even if you feel compelled, remember where it's coming from. So you need to communicate, like, I care about you. Like this is about me caring about you. This is not about me judging you or telling you that I know what's best for you. If someone rejects that, I think the best stance is to say, well, I am here. If anything changes, if you feel differently, if you want to talk, just know that I am here.
Wow, that is good. And like you said, you can't be forceful, and you have to trust your gut.
Yeah.
And that's one thing that you've done with so many people, so many clients throughout the DMV area through your practice, help guiding them through these very steps. So when did you start your practice, and what was your mission when you started it?
Yeah. So interestingly enough, originally, as I mentioned earlier, my interest in law, I started off doing forensic psychology, meaning that I worked in hospitals that sort of had a forensic component, meaning that people had been involved in the legal system, somewhat tied to their mental health. So maybe someone had committed an act, and it was in the midst of experiencing some mental health symptoms. So I did a lot of work with that, and I really liked it. Actually, my personal plan was like, I'm going to stay at this hospital and just work here, and that's going to be that. And I think like maybe a little bit of divine intervention, like there was a hiring freeze. And so I was like, I guess I can't stay here.
Or back home?
For the federal, like the government, the district, they had a hiring freeze at the time that I was offered the position. So I couldn't take it. And so I went into a group practice, which was private practice. And I really picked back up my love for anxiety work. And it was just going really, really well. And then I had a baby. And so I had maternity leave, and I was doing my own thing on, short time. After my maternity leave, I was like, you know what? I'm gonna go for this. So 2018, I officially had my own private practice, and I've been doing fairly well ever since. As you can imagine, the pandemic threw a loop for all of us. And so there were lots of people seeking therapy, and lots of therapists needed and continue to be needed. But right now I'm just doing that 100% virtually, just, for safety reasons and convenience reasons.
Yeah. And that's actually when I met you around that time.
Yep.
And I was so inspired by your platform of Slay Your Anxiety. Where did that come from?
That came from, so if anyone is familiar with the Therapy for Black Girls podcast, I interviewed on that, and that was the name of the episode.
Wow.
And so Dr. Joy Harden Bradford, who is the host, she talks about it, and I was like, girl, like this phrase, like it was perfect. And she was like, go for it. And I was like, thank you.
Look at that. Yeah. Look at that. So what does it mean to actively slay? I mean, I'm thinking about like a person with a sword, but of course, that's not reality. But what does it mean for a person to slay their anxiety?
It's a combination, right? So I feel like it's a play on words in the sense of like, definitely slay, like you're talking about, like that active fight against your anxiety, but also slay, like, be a Black girl, like, slay that, like, the way that you approach lots of things with passion and effort and style and even grace, like we're going to turn our energy against anxiety, because that's really the best way to fight anxiety, is not to align with it, but to identify it as like, this is kind of foreign. Like, no, I won't give into that message of fear. I won't believe, whatever story or twist that anxiety is putting onto this. And I'm just going to move past that, like essentially slay it.
Wow. I mean, when I tell you it's needed, because before the pandemic, actually, I had started to experience anxiety, and I experienced it for quite some time. And thank the Lord, I'm in a great space now. But for people who may not have a therapist or may not have even talked about, wow, I'm having these feelings, I'm having these thoughts, I'm having this, tension in my chest, like, how do they begin to actively, get ahead of anxiety or get the help that they need?
I think you're bringing up a good point is noticing it. And so anxiety exists, I would say, maybe on two levels, a physical level and a mental level. So physically, anxiety looks like what you said, like tight chest, sometimes trouble breathing. It could be stomach upset, headaches, neck tension, also things like sleeplessness. But then on a mental level, it's like excessive and persistent worry and a lot of rumination, like going over the same thoughts, overthinking. The two of those tied together, I know a lot of times, people like to use the phrase like, oh, so-and-so has bad nerves. So-and-so really probably has anxiety. Like, that's just a colloquial term, like nerves. But eventually that's what they're probably talking about.
And I know there's so many avenues to make progress in anxiety. So what are some of the options if people are wanting to slay it, let's say starting today? I'm ready to do something about it. What are some practical things that they can do to begin to see progress?
I would say one of the ways to tackle physical symptoms is something so simple and overlooked is breathing. Breathing is obviously the way that we exist, and it is a very strong and powerful thing in terms of the feedback in our body. So when we are afraid, when we have anxiety, our brain sends down a signal to our body like, be on high alert, something's wrong, something's happening. Now, I think originally on a biological level, that's meant to be like, I have to run away from some sort of, but when you're, of course, in your office, that doesn't make sense. And so your body, your heart beats fast, your muscles get tense. And if you can breathe, it sends a message back up to your brain to say like, we're all good down here. You don't have to keep setting an alarm. And it really helps calm things down. And it gives you a chance to even take a step back and start to work on the thoughts to say like I mentioned earlier, like, okay, what else? Is that actually the case? Is my boss mad at me, or were they in a rush, or are they like this with everybody? To be able to kind of sort through the thoughts, you kind of sometimes have to take care of the physical experience first.
I am such a lover of natural ways and natural health. And I also know that there's some times where people have to get on medication. So when does one know, whether it's depression or anxiety, like when does one know, okay, I think I may need something to assist me further, and it may be medicine?
Yeah, one of the things that I look out for, so as you can imagine, I'm a psychologist, and so I'm not prescribing medication like a psychiatrist. I'm doing talk therapy. So a lot of my clients come to me with the intention of saying like, I don't really want to go the medication route.
Yeah.
And I say, that's fine. I do believe that talk therapy has a lot of value. I find that if we cannot, even with a lot of skills and effort, can't establish a more consistent level of like rest or calmness, like I'm trying really hard and it's just not getting anywhere. I may say, well, why don't we consider the medication? Because, the research does show that medication plus therapy is a great combination if necessary. Sometimes there's just something biological going on that needs to be intervened with. It's not a matter of willpower. And oftentimes people kind of get caught up in this sentiment of, oh, I have to take medication. I didn't try hard enough, or I'm not good at this. And sometimes it's just the way our body works. We need some intervention to be able to slow down and bring the other skills on deck that aren't medication.
Right. And these are conversations that I've had with family members, one with schizophrenia, another with depression, and just understanding the chemical imbalances. It's nothing wrong with you. You haven't done anything to deserve it, but our bodies are just in need of different things. So each person varies. And I love how you broke that stigma down. There's another stigma that I want us to get to. Does faith and therapy, can they coexist? Because I want people that say, okay, I'm a Christian, I can't go to therapy and I can't talk about my mental health. Let's go there today.
Yeah, because I think that is very untrue, first of all. I think you can pray and have a therapist at the same time, because ultimately, again, I think, as I mentioned before, it's not a willpower thing. It's not necessarily I'm not praying hard enough, and so that's why I haven't overcome this mental health experience. I think that just as much as you can look to therapy for support, it doesn't invalidate prayer or religion or faith in any way, shape, or form. I have tons of clients who are firm believers, who are excellent saints, and it is a part of their life that we don't leave out of the therapy room. It's important to have that. So you definitely don't have to put one aside for the other. One is certainly not, I would never advocate that one is better than the other. I think that sometimes, my own personal experience and past history, I think that because mental health wasn't discussed so much and there was so much stigma, it was hard to integrate the two.
Yeah.
So it was more like, I don't really know enough. I'm just going to pray for you. We don't need to talk about that. Now, my hope is that we're in a place where we can say, oh, no, we know a little bit more about this. This is not a personal moral failing. This is just as much as we wouldn't turn you away if you said you needed help up the stairs.
Yes.
It's needing help and support in another way that is less visible than a physical situation.
Yeah. And I have to applaud the church, because I have seen the progress. When I started like holistic wellness empowerment, because I was a nurse and I was also ordained clergy. I felt like the two worlds were speaking a different language, and we've made so much progress, but we serve, a faith a holistic faith of the mind, the body, the spirit. So for those who just needed that encouragement, you have two people who are of faith that say, hey, God has blessed Dr. Alicia just as much as blessed your pastor, and both can coexist. And if you want to talk further, feel free to DM me, and we can talk about it a bit more. But I think that it's time for us to rise above that stigma and to know that you can have God and you can also have a therapist.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So important. So you have a quote on Instagram, and I think that it is so important. You said self-care is an investment that yields the highest return. And we're in a depleted society. There's so much chaos and trauma. There's so much going on. How does one fit self-care into their lives when they already have too much to juggle?
I think that's a great question. I'm glad that you put it in that way, because it's more about, the reason why I said it's an investment is that it may require time, sacrifice, or effort in a way that we're thinking about the outcome. Like, I just want the rest. I want the rejuvenation. Why do I have to add something else? And the idea is I'm swapping my time no matter what. If I'm giving too much, that is me using my time in a way that is depleting. What if I can give myself some of that time back? And so self-care doesn't have to be huge. I think commercially it's something like a vacation or a spa day. But in reality, self-care is making multiple decisions that either prioritize or continue to include you. So something as small as, like, if I'm sitting in the car and my favorite song is on, I could jump out and rush in the house, or I could just finish listening to it and like just enjoy that moment and feel like, wow, that just gave me a little bit of something that is actually going to put me in a better place before I go into my family.
Yeah.
And that was you taking care of yourself. Like, it's just, the point of it is to be intentional, because you're sending yourself the message like, I'm worth it. I'm valuable too. There's this. And that means something. I think as you do it more and more in the long run, you're giving a bigger message to yourself.
Yeah. And again, with my belief in holistic wellness, like self-care is so important. But I know that, and I have these conversations, some people need to be convinced that they're worth that time. How do you remind them that, yes, you have a lot going on, and they're like, but I don't have time. But like, what do you say?
Yeah, you know what? Getting buy-in is hard. I will admit that. If I knew how to make people do everything I wanted, I would be a millionaire. So ultimately, sometimes I just point it out, because if this person is coming to me with logic, then I bring back logic and I say, so how has that been going for you? Has it been working? Like, you doing too much all the time, you're essentially saying that this is leaving me burnt out. I wonder what would happen if you just kept doing it the way that you do it. We both know the answer is like, I'll feel worse. And so I say, like, you only get different from doing different. So let's just give it a trial run. Like, we already know that you know how to do too much. You can go back to doing it if you want to. What if we got you doing some different things? Or what if, you just tried out a couple of things? Of course, it is harder to break down this message of, am I worth it? Am I valuable? Like, that's a bigger thing. And I think that's why self-care can be so hard, because it's really actually tied to sometimes personal inner stuff, and not just, getting your nails done. It's something else. And that's why I said, by doing small prescriptive things, you start building up this message of like, oh, I am worth it. Like, this does feel good. This does work. And that kind of like gives you some reinforcement to keep going with it.
Right. And I'm even thinking, as you're talking, that self-care may even allow you to process the therapy sessions, because you have an array of emotions.
Yeah.
How does one not just make therapy repetitive, or like just scratch it off of their to-do list? Like, how does one internalize the experience?
It's about being present. So that to me is one of the biggest things that I talk to my clients about overall, which is like, how can you be in a moment, not thinking about later, not thinking about yesterday? How do you just be? And sometimes it's hard, because in the act of being, we have to mediate and control our thoughts, right? Back to the thoughts again. Like, we're learning how to meditate. Meditation really talks about this idea of, you don't have to be forceful with your thoughts. Just know, like, oh, my mind's strayed. Let me bring it back. So it's this idea of learning how to not to be forceful with yourself. How to just internalize and be like, wow, in this moment, this just feels really good. And that's what it is. It's not a judgment. I'm not thinking of extra things about it. I'm just kind of learning to tolerate and move at a slower pace, really.
And I know that presence and being present with yourself, for some people, it may be a bit scary, because you have to think, and you may have to like dig up some things that you buried. So for those who are probably a bit anxious or scared or afraid to even begin this journey of like self-discovery and talking, like, how do you motivate them to continue to maybe overcome that fear and to just feel?
Yeah, that's a hard thing to reprogram. I think a lot of us have learned to go in our heads and think instead of feel, because feelings are powerful.
Yeah.
I think oftentimes some practical ways to learn how to just be present are using your senses. So be like rubbing some scented lotion on your hands and just smelling it. You may have some thoughts that come in, but you kind of tell yourself like, no, I'm just smelling my hands right now. Like, we don't even have to go there. Like, we don't have to think about certain things. But the other thing that, of course, as a psychologist, I'm going to say is, if stuff keeps popping up, it wants to be addressed. It wants to be acknowledged. And so we have to kind of take stock and ask the question of like, can I continue pushing this down? Because emotions, they don't go away. They just hang out till next time.
Wow.
If you find that in your free time, you are consumed or overwhelmed, it may be useful you might not jump into that right away in therapy, but you start to develop the skills to say, all right, I'm ready to peek in that box a little bit. And let's see if we can kind of deal with it instead of kind of continuously pushing it back.
Yeah. And that vulnerability to open up takes time. So how, like, when people are on, I think, like Psychologist Today, or of course, people are going to be reaching out to you because you're so amazing. How do you find the right person, or is it appropriate to shop around until you find someone that you really kind of click with?
Yeah, definitely. To be honest, I think it is very personal and unique. Some people find their therapist on the first shot, like they scroll and they're like, this person. Other people, they work with someone for a little bit of time and they're like, I'm just, I'm not really feeling this. That is okay.
Yeah.
Now, if you find yourself on your 7th therapist in like 2 months, I would question that.
Okay.
However, not just psychologists, therapists in general, they do usually phone consultations. So you can go in and you can ask questions. You can talk to them for about usually 15 to 20 minutes and get an idea of like, do I feel comfortable with you? Do I like the way that you describe you do therapy? But also when I start with my clients, I tell them, let's just go through 1 to 3 sessions. Better sense of who you are. You can get a better sense of me. And then we kind of reconvene and say, how does this feel? Do we want to keep moving forward? Do you want me to give you some names of other people? Because my ultimate goal is that someone improves. It's not that they just stay and try to, make it work or figure it out.
Yeah, and I've never even heard that method, or even with the whole consultation. So I think that's going to be helpful to a lot of people who may have curiosity but don't necessarily want to just jump all the way in. Yeah. That's very reassuring. When does one know it's time to change? Not that the relationship is bad or anything like that, but maybe you've been with them for quite some time, or you are working through a particular issue. Like when is it time to perhaps reevaluate or even switch or stop therapy?
I find that what I've typically heard or even experienced is when I'm noticing that I'm like maybe holding back more, or I've experienced clients who sort of are canceling a lot, sort of like, oh, I can't this time, or like, oh yeah, something came up.
Okay.
Those are all kind of like, if you're feeling avoidant, especially as a psychologist, I really, really recommend and stress that you tell your therapist. I know it feels awkward. I even tell my clients, if you really have something to say, you can email me after this session. Like if you feel uncomfortable saying it to my face, because I really want people to just grow and develop their communication skills.
Oh, that's good.
But sometimes it may be something that can be fixed. Like you may be thinking this is something bigger that can't be addressed, and it actually is just what you need. The way you guys, now you open up a door to have a conversation to say like, hey, can you give me some other names? Or you give them feedback of how they made you feel. And that just may be important. Just like any other profession, it's like, I don't really like, there are a lot of us, right? You're getting your nails done and you're like, I don't want to say nothing.
Yeah.
You have to walk around with the nails. So it should be little, it's not personal. Like, remember, it's not personal. And hopefully your therapist also has that stance. It's not personal. You just have your needs met.
That is good. And I just pray that shackles are falling from someone who may have had curiosity but didn't necessarily know if this was the right route for you. And I know that this conversation is important. We're in Mental Health Awareness Month. And what is the message that you want to get across to people as we go through this month? Like what does it mean to you as a professional?
Yeah. So for me, I think it's nice to see other people take part in a conversation that I live, right? That I'm always open to and interested in people checking in on themselves and on others and their loved ones, and really having this open conversation to say, like, it's okay to not feel okay. It's okay to be in therapy. It's okay to have rough days. Like, one of the things that we talked about, I think social media can make us forget that every day is not positive or exciting, and that humans have emotions. I think that when we only focus on the higher end of the spectrum, which is like joy and excitement, you have to acknowledge there's a whole spectrum. So at the other side is sadness, other types of challenges, and you're a human being and you're going to have the full range. You cannot cut off one range without cutting off the other. I meet a lot of clients who are like, just teach me how to be on the happy side. Tell me how to get rid of the negative emotion. And I say, if you work hard to get rid of negative emotion, you will cut yourself off from positive emotion, and you will be stuck in the middle, and you will feel blah. That's not the life that we want to live.
That is so liberating. I never thought about that. And that brings me back to this movie that I saw, Inside Out. And it talked about emotions. It's like a children's movie.
It is. So I haven't seen it yet. I keep saying I'm going to watch it, but I've heard really, really good things about it.
Yeah. And it helped me to embrace those not so fuzzy emotions, because you need to be angry from time to time. You don't necessarily have to like act on the anger or sadness. So I love how you mentioned that you are not too aimed to be on any end of the spectrum. Like you just kind of like just naturally flow into your emotions and acknowledge it.
Mm-hmm. You just let yourself have the human experience. I think to understand happiness, you had to have had sadness.
Yeah.
Or for it to be meaningful. Like that is the contrast. That is what helps us be like, I'm having such a good time because I've been bored before. So the idea is that emotions are information. If you can kind of just try your best, if you're fearful of emotions, or you're like, I don't want to go there because I think I'll be consumed, remind yourself emotions are information.
Wow.
I'm angry because something upset me. I'm maybe scared. I'm happy. Like this is information I'm taking in about my experience. Now, what's helpful about therapy is that sometimes we have emotions that are not in proportion to what the situation is. So therapy helps you recalibrate to say, oh, I'm just kind of having an off situation with my friend. This is not the end of the world, or this does not mean that I'm bad. It just means that we had a disagreement.
Wow. Okay. I like that. So emotions that are information. And I'm assuming that with this information, you then process your next step. And if you need help processing that next step, that's where a therapist come in to help you give language to the emotion.
Because if you think about it, right, most of us are only taught like happy, sad, angry, scared, like 4 emotions. And I give my clients a list when we first start working together. There's like 75 words on my list because I want them to expand their vocabulary and say, were you mad, or were you frustrated or annoyed or irritated? Because there's intensity levels. So it's important just to like know yourself. Like it just helps you say like, what am I feeling? What's another more descriptive word for this?
That is good. And for the longest, I had a hard time describing my emotions. It'll make me so just like, I don't want to talk about it. But I've been so liberated in trying to articulate how I'm feeling and to share it not only just with myself, but with others when appropriate. So if you don't have the language risers, maybe go to Google and get a word chart. But
you can Google like emotion word list, and you will get many results.
Wow. Well, I can't believe that we're almost out of time, but I would love for you to share anything that you have upcoming, or how can they find you, your social, like is there, what do you want to share with the audience today?
Yeah, so, of course, as I mentioned, I have a private practice, so I do see people for individual therapy. I'm in the process of looking for a new staff member. So if anybody is licensed or newly graduating in the psychology field, feel free to send me an email. I also am in the process of launching a group this summer for women. It's going to be an anxiety group.
Wow.
It's more of a wellness group, so it's not traditional group therapy. It's going to be virtual, and anybody can join. You don't have to just be in the DMV area.
Wow.
And so that's always been fun. I've had a few of them before, and it's really been a nice experience. Like, I really enjoy being in a room full of ladies kind of together, and we're all kind of overcoming at the same time. And then what else? Oh, so social media wise, as I mentioned, my handle on pretty much everything, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, is Help Me Hodge. So HelpMeHodge, which is my so Help Me Hodge, you can find me. But also my website is www.slayyoranxiety.com.
I love it. I love it. I love it. Well, I know that they are going to be reaching out, and we are also speaking that some risers are going to be attending your summer kickoff.
Great.
Intimate group. One last question. I love to end every segment with this. If you had to inspire anyone to rise in their mental health, what would you like to say?
Ooh, that's a good question. I want to think so I can say the answer. If I wanted to inspire anyone, I would say you are not your past. You don't have to be stuck in your future rather. It is more important to be present. And so I would inspire people to just take stock of where you are today and ask yourself, is this enough for me?
Wow.
And if it's not enough, I am going to commit to figuring out what my next steps are. Whether that's therapy, whether that's just, it could be a simple self-help book, whether that's opening up, talking to somebody I trust. But acknowledging I may not be where I want to be, but that doesn't mean I can't get there.
Ooh, that's good. Risers, I hope that y'all wrote that down. And I hope that y'all head on over to her Instagram and her website to really, really, really get connected to this powerful, powerful, powerful movement. So thank you so much, Dr. Alicia. We are so happy you joined us. And again, risers, thank you so much for rising with us. Like, share this episode with a friend. Do not be greedy, keeping it to yourself. And until then, rise because the world is waiting. All right, y'all. We'll see y'all next week. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much for tuning in to the Rising with Christian podcast. There is someone you know who could be blessed by this episode, so share it with a friend, be a blessing, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. All right, guys, have a wonderful week, and don't forget to rise today because your future is now.